Sometimes an entire criminal empire doesn't collapse because of a raid, a witness, or a major intelligence breakthrough. Sometimes it falls apart because of something so ordinary, so quick, so accidental, that no one involved could ever imagine it would change everything. In this case, it wasn't a mistake worth minutes or hours. It was a mistake worth exactly 7 seconds. A simple photo, taken casually during traffic on the M25, with no intention of revealing anything dangerous, ended up becoming the crack in the entire structure. What followed next was a chain reaction that investigators had been waiting 18 months for, and the person who took that photo would never have thought it was the moment everything slipped out of their control.
The story begins long before that 7-second moment, with a man who believed he had engineered the perfect import pipeline, something so smooth, so carefully constructed, that each piece of it looked ordinary on its own. Parcels arriving from overseas didn't stand out. Delivery addresses rotated just enough to avoid suspicion. Packages looked harmless, disguised as medical supplies and household kits. To anyone outside the network, it seemed like someone was simply running a small online business, receiving deliveries just like thousands of others across the UK. And that was exactly the point. He had studied how mainstream delivery systems worked, how e-commerce companies avoided delays, how they shifted stock rapidly. And he applied that same thinking to an operation that needed to stay invisible. He didn't rely on risky meetings or rushed exchanges. He relied on systems, timing, and planning. For more than a year, that approach paid off. Each month, more parcels entered the country with the same quiet, predictable rhythm. There were no big shipments, no heavy boxes that could trigger suspicion, just small, manageable packages sent consistently enough to blend into the daily flow of international post. At the center of it all was a man who believed his intelligence could outpace any investigator. He didn't brag, he didn't show off, and he didn't create the chaos that usually attracts attention. His setup was based on patience, structure, and calculated distance. He rarely touched anything himself. He communicated through layers, using runners, temporary addresses, and a rotating cast of receivers who knew only what they needed to know. He thought that by removing himself from every stage, he had removed every possible risk. What he couldn't remove was human nature, the small decisions people make without thinking, the habits they follow automatically, and the things they do every day without imagining consequences. That's what leads us to the M25. He wasn't doing anything unusual. He was in traffic, watching a long line of cars in front of him, waiting for movement like everyone else on the motorway. It was just another slow afternoon. Out of boredom, or maybe routine, he lifted his phone, opened a chat, and tapped the camera. Maybe he wanted to show someone where he was. Maybe he was updating the team. Or maybe he was simply passing time. No one knows exactly what was going through his mind, but the action was quick. Angle the phone, take the shot, hit send. 7 seconds. That was all. But the thing about photos is that they capture more than what you intend. He thought he was simply sharing a normal moment on the road. What he didn't realize was that the background of that image contained details investigators had been trying to connect for months. Tiny pieces that didn't mean much on their own, but became powerful when placed together. A specific location, a specific time, a specific object that linked directly to a parcel investigators had already begun examining. It wasn't revealing something dramatic, but in investigations, even a small clue can become a direction. And in this case, that direction was everything. At that same time, the network was already under quiet observation. Not enough to launch raids, not enough to bring in arrests, but enough to raise questions. Border Force had noticed something unusual about one particular package that didn't match the usual patterns. Officer Sarah Chen spotted a discrepancy inside what appeared to be a veterinary kit, something just slightly off, subtle enough that many might have missed it, but clear enough that she decided to take a closer look. That decision was the first shift in momentum. When she flagged the parcel, analysts began reviewing previous shipments, looking for patterns that may have repeated. Dates, sizes, sender names, delivery areas. All these things, when reviewed individually, looked ordinary, but when reviewed together, they began forming a picture that didn't feel normal. The investigators needed something definitive, something that tied the individuals to the shipments directly. That was the missing piece. Until the photo appeared. When that 7-second snapshot surfaced during digital analysis, it linked more than just a person to a location. It linked movement to timing. It linked the device to an operation. It connected a simple moment on the motorway to a pattern that spanned over a year. The investigators finally had something they could map, something they could use to check timestamps, phone connections, and parcel routes. The photo quietly unlocked the timeline that had been hidden behind layers of careful planning. From the perspective of the ringleader and his team, nothing felt unusual. They were continuing business as usual, assuming their system was still invisible. They didn't know that behind the scenes, each call, each parcel, each address was slowly being reorganized by investigators into a single, clear chain of events. And while the network thought the photo was just another message in a routine chat, the investigators saw it as the missing thread they could pull, the one that caused the whole structure to loosen. The fall didn't happen instantly. It happened silently, as analysts connected data, as officers cross-referenced delivery dates, as time locations matched with route histories, and as the small pieces began fitting together. That's how a 7-second action, something that should have meant nothing, became the start of the end for an operation that had once been so confident. It shows how in real investigations, the moment that brings everything down isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's something so quiet and small that the person responsible doesn't even remember doing it.
As those early impressions settled into her mind, she continued reading through the man's online messages, noticing how each one felt carefully crafted to make her feel seen and understood. And even though she tried to convince herself she wasn't the type to fall for flattering words, there was something undeniably comforting about his steady presence on her screen, almost like a calm voice in a noisy world. That sense of comfort became the foundation on which she slowly allowed herself to open up, sharing glimpses of her daily routine, little frustrations from work, the small joys that usually went unnoticed. And in return, he responded with empathy that felt unusually attentive, reinforcing the belief that she had finally found someone who genuinely valued her. With every conversation, she felt more drawn in, telling herself that this steady exchange of messages was normal, that building a connection through words alone had become an accepted part of modern dating, and yet there was a quiet voice in the back of her mind reminding her that digital familiarity could sometimes mask realities that weren't visible through a screen. But the conversations continued with such ease that the doubts gradually slipped away, replaced by a growing excitement each time her phone lit up with his name, making her believe that perhaps this connection was not just convenient, but meaningful. She noticed how he asked questions that seemed thoughtful rather than intrusive, and the way he mirrored her interests made her feel aligned with him in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time, leading her to believe they shared a natural rhythm. With each passing day, their conversations became longer and more personal, moving beyond surface-level topics into discussions about aspirations, past experiences, and the kind of future they hoped to build, creating a sense of alignment that felt rare and special. She began discussing their connection with a close friend, explaining how she wasn't sure what to call it yet, but felt something different this time, something that seemed sincere enough to explore further. Her friend reminded her to stay cautious, not out of fear, but practicality, explaining that online interactions can sometimes feel deeper than they truly are because people present the best versions of themselves. Yet she reassured her friend that she was being careful, even though deep down she knew her guard was slowly lowering. Still, there was something about the ease of the conversations that made her think this connection didn't need constant overthinking, because it brought a sense of peace into her life that she hadn't realized was missing. He too played a significant role in maintaining that comfort, always responding with warmth and making her feel like their growing closeness was just as meaningful to him, which strengthened her willingness to trust in what they were building. When he suggested meeting in person, the idea didn't feel rushed or uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like the natural next step in a connection that seemed to be progressing smoothly. and she convinced herself that meeting would simply transform their digital conversations into something more tangible. She took time to prepare emotionally for the possibility that he might be different in person, reminding herself that online impressions can sometimes feel bigger than reality. Yet she held on to the optimism that meeting would only bring clarity. As she planned the details, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, the kind that comes when you're stepping into something unfamiliar but hopeful. She spent the next day imagining how their first conversation in person might unfold, picturing the simple warmth of greeting someone who had already become a familiar presence in her thoughts, and she found herself smiling at the idea. Her friends offered small suggestions about keeping the first meeting simple and public as a general rule for online dating, and she appreciated their concern even though she felt confident in her judgment. She reread the messages between them, noticing how naturally their conversations flowed, reinforcing the belief that meeting him in person would simply deepen what already felt like a steady foundation. She took small steps to prepare, choosing an outfit that made her feel comfortable rather than overdone, because she wanted the moment to feel genuine instead of overtly polished. As the day approached, their conversations became even more frequent, as though both of them were eager to turn their digital connection into something real. She found herself rehearsing potential topics in her head, not because she expected awkwardness, but because she wanted everything to feel as effortless in person as it felt through messages. Meanwhile, he continued to speak with the same calm confidence that had originally drawn her in, assuring her that their meeting would be relaxed and enjoyable. And those words gave her reassurance that she wasn't stepping into something uncertain. Even so, she couldn't shake the underlying awareness of how much trust was required to transition from an online exchange to an in-person meeting. And she reminded herself to stay grounded, while still allowing space for the excitement that had been building. The night before they were supposed to meet, she reviewed the details one more time, making sure everything was clear and straightforward, and she felt a quiet thrill run through her at the thought of beginning a new chapter. In that moment, she felt hopeful, believing that this simple decision to meet someone she had connected with online might lead to something meaningful, something that could bring warmth and companionship back into her life. Yet beneath the excitement, there lingered a subtle hesitation, not rooted in fear, but in an awareness of how unpredictable online connections could be. Because no matter how comfortable she felt, she understood that first meetings always carried a level of uncertainty. Still, she trusted that she had taken reasonable steps, that she had read the situation clearly, and that she was choosing to move forward with an open heart but a grounded mindset. And with that balance of hope and caution guiding her, she closed her messages for the night, unaware that the next chapter of this story would reveal truths that would challenge everything she believed about online trust, personal intuition, and the delicate line between connection and illusion.
And as the next chapter revealed itself, she found herself stepping into the day of their planned meeting with a blend of anticipation and steady nerves, telling herself that this moment was simply the natural extension of the connection they had carefully built over countless conversations. The morning felt strangely calm, almost too calm, as though the world around her had softened to let her focus entirely on the significance of what was ahead, and she tried to interpret that calmness as a positive sign rather than a warning. She moved through her routine with unusual awareness, noticing the details she usually overlooked: the quiet hum of her kettle, the faint gleam of sunlight slipping through her window, the gentle rhythm of footsteps in the hallway outside, each one grounding her in the reality of the moment and reminding her that life often brings turning points disguised as ordinary days. As time passed, she checked her phone repeatedly, not out of uncertainty, but out of the excitement that had slowly become part of her daily life since meeting him online, and the messages he sent that morning felt as warm and reassuring as ever. He reminded her of the time they planned, expressing how much he was looking forward to finally meeting her, and those words carried a kind of ease that made her believe everything would unfold exactly as she hoped. She dressed with the same gentle confidence she had felt the night before, choosing something simple, something authentically her, because she wanted the meeting to feel real rather than curated. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door for a moment, letting herself breathe deeply, feeling her pulse steady as she reminded herself that this step was part of something she had willingly chosen, a chance to explore a connection that had brought sincerity into her life at a time when she hadn't even expected it. The journey to the meeting place felt longer than usual, not because of distance, but because her mind kept drifting between excitement and reflection, replaying fragments of their conversations, the small jokes they shared, the thoughtful moments that had made her feel understood. She kept reminding herself that online impressions can be imperfect, yet the sense of alignment she had felt with him gave her enough comfort to move forward with trust that felt cautious but genuine. When she arrived, she found herself scanning the surroundings, soaking in the familiar details of a place she had visited many times, though today it felt almost unfamiliar because of the emotional weight attached to it. She checked her phone again, reading his final message confirming he was on the way, and she smiled at how natural it felt to wait for someone who had become such a consistent presence in her digital world. As she waited, she noticed her thoughts shifting, not toward worry, but toward introspection, realizing how remarkable it was that a simple swipe on a screen had led her to this moment, and how modern relationships often begin with digital breadcrumbs before growing into something that feels genuinely human. She reflected on how easy it is to forget that behind every profile is a real person with a past, hopes, complexities, and layers that cannot be fully understood through curated photos and typed words alone. Yet she believed that meeting him would provide the clarity needed to see who he truly was beyond the screen. Minutes passed, and the anticipation grew heavier but remained gentle, like a curtain lifting slowly before a performance, inviting her to step into the unknown with hope rather than fear. She found herself thinking about how unpredictable life can be, how a single decision, like saying yes to a conversation with a stranger online, can shape a story in unexpected ways, whether that story leads to companionship, growth, or lessons she never realized she needed. As she stood there, she couldn't help but replay the earlier stages of their connection, noticing details she had overlooked at first, the way he always responded with perfectly timed reassurance, the balance he maintained between being caring and reserved, and how effortlessly he seemed to mirror her moods. These reflections didn't bring discomfort. Instead, they brought curiosity, the kind that arises when you realize you are about to discover whether the image you built in your mind aligns with the reality standing before you. And in that quiet space between expectation and truth, she felt a subtle shift inside herself, a quiet determination to see things clearly, to trust her instincts, and to observe not just with hope, but with awareness. She understood that meeting someone for the first time is not just about discovering who they are, but also about discovering how you feel in their presence, whether the warmth continues or fades, whether comfort deepens or reveals contradictions. She reminded herself to stay present, to listen carefully, to pay attention to the small cues that often reveal more than words, and to trust yourself enough to step back if something didn't feel right. That gentle preparation gave her a sense of grounding, a reassurance that she wasn't stepping into this blindly, but with a thoughtful mindset shaped by experience, optimism, and a growing understanding of human behavior. And as the moment of meeting drew closer, she realized how monumental this step felt, not because of who he might be, but because of what it represented: her willingness to give new connections a chance, her courage to navigate the uncertainties of modern dating, and her resilience in a world where trust must be balanced with discernment. She felt herself standing taller, more aware of her surroundings, more connected to her intuition, and more capable of facing whatever truth awaited her. Whether this meeting would lead to something lasting or serve as a reminder to tread carefully in the digital age, she knew she was walking into it with sincerity and strength, guided by both hope and self-awareness. And as she looked up, preparing to take the next step, she understood that this moment wasn't just the continuation of a conversation that had begun online. It was the beginning of clarity, the point where expectations meet reality, where assumptions dissolve, and where the truth, quiet, subtle, and waiting, finally steps forward to reveal itself. And as she looked up, preparing to take the next step, she understood that this moment wasn't just the continuation of a conversation that had begun online. It was the beginning of clarity, the point where expectations meet reality, where assumptions dissolve, and where the truth, quiet, subtle, and waiting, finally steps forward to reveal itself. And in that same breath, As her eyes scanned the space ahead of her, she sensed something shift in the atmosphere, not dramatically or suddenly, but in a way that made her internal compass turn slightly, urging her to pay attention. She noticed movements around her, the ordinary rhythm of people going about their day, yet she felt a heightened awareness settling over her, almost as if her instincts were preparing her for a moment her mind hadn't fully recognized yet. She adjusted her posture, took another steady breath, and allowed herself to focus, grounding herself in the reality that the person she had been speaking to for weeks was now moments away from stepping into her physical world. It struck her how modern connections often build themselves through a screen, where tone is interpreted, not heard, and expressions are imagined, not seen, yet the emotional impact feels just as real. She wondered briefly whether he felt the same mixture of anticipation and curiosity, whether he was approaching this meeting with sincerity, confidence, or perhaps his own quiet nervousness. She tried to picture him weaving through the crowd, looking for her, scanning faces with the same eagerness she felt. The idea almost made her smile, the kind of soft smile people make when they allow themselves to believe in something positive. But just as that small smile started to form, her attention caught on a detail she hadn't expected, an unfamiliar presence lingering at a distance, someone who seemed aware of her in a way that didn't match the normal flow of passers-by. It wasn't alarming, but it was noticeable, the kind of detail that the mind registers when it's already in a state of heightened awareness. She didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, she observed quietly, reminding herself that public spaces often contain moments that feel coincidental, though they are nothing more than background noise. Still, it nudged her to stay alert, not fearful, but attentive, a mindset she had always considered healthy when meeting someone from the digital world for the first time. She shifted her gaze again, scanning for the familiar description he had given her the night before, recalling the jacket he mentioned, the type of shoes he preferred, small details that she thought would make recognizing him easier. But as she continued to look around, she realized that the environment itself was subtly changing, not physically, but perceptually, as if the anticipation had sharpened her senses to the point where she noticed things she would normally ignore. A distant ringtone made her flinch slightly, and she checked her phone, expecting a last-minute message from him, maybe telling her he had arrived or was running a few minutes late. But her screen remained quiet. The absence of a message wasn't worrying, but it added a slight layer of uncertainty, a reminder that despite all the conversations they had shared, she truly didn't know how he behaved in the real world. She decided to take a few steps forward, adjusting her position to get a better view of the area, and in doing so, she felt her confidence steady itself once more. She reminded herself that she was in a public place, surrounded by people, with daylight guiding her, and that her entire purpose today was simply to understand whether this person was who he presented himself to be. But as she moved, she sensed the same unfamiliar figure subtly repositioning as well. And though their behavior wasn't overtly concerning, it did make her more conscious of her surroundings. She told herself not to overthink, but she also knew that intuition exists for a reason, especially in situations where the online world meets the real one. She glanced at the entrance of the cafe where they were supposed to meet, half expecting him to walk out, waving or smiling, or searching for her. Yet the door opened only for strangers who barely noticed her presence. Still, she remained patient, knowing that meeting someone in person often involves small delays, unexpected detours, or last-minute nerves. She checked her reflection in the window beside her, smoothing her hair subtly, wanting to feel composed, presentable, and confident, not because she needed to impress him, but because she wanted to feel grounded in herself. And as minutes continued to pass, she felt the blend of curiosity and uncertainty intertwine, shaping a quiet question inside her. Was this anticipation building toward a genuine connection, or was it gradually revealing something she hadn't considered before? She reminded herself of all the precautions she had taken, telling a friend where she would be, choosing a public location, arranging to stay in well-lit areas, choices that represented not fear but responsibility.
They were habits she had formed in a world where digital interactions sometimes blur the line between familiarity and unfamiliarity, and she knew that no matter how warm a conversation feels, reality can reveal aspects that the screen cannot. The air around her continued to shift in a way she couldn't quite describe, a mixture of normality and subtle tension, like a quiet note humming beneath the surface of an otherwise calm moment. She took another breath, feeling both the hope that had carried her here and the awareness that now grounded her, and she understood that whatever happened next would define not just her perception of him, but her entire understanding of this connection. And just as she turned slightly to check the street again, her phone finally vibrated, its sudden buzz cutting through the silence of her thoughts and sending a ripple of emotion through her chest, not fear, but a sense of revelation. She lifted the phone slowly, expecting a message from him explaining where he was or what had delayed him, but the name on the screen wasn't his. It was someone she hadn't spoken to in days, someone who had no reason to contact her at this moment, yet their message appeared with a timing that felt almost intentional. She opened it cautiously, and as she began reading, her expression shifted, her breath paused, and her heartbeat slowed, not because of alarm, but because the words on the screen introduced a truth she had not anticipated, a truth that didn't replace her hope, but reframed everything she was waiting for. And in that single moment of realization, she understood that this meeting was about to take a turn she never imagined, guiding her toward a clarity she didn't know she needed, and unfolding a truth that would reshape everything she believed about the connection that had brought her here.